Oppenheimer is breaking box office records. So surely now is a time for us to consider the power and danger of nuclear weapons and stop obsessively spending money on them. No, it isn't. Hello there, you 6.5 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining us on this voyage to truth and freedom, where we look at recent history, technological advances, and their monumental power for destruction. We're of course talking about Oppenheimer, which is breaking box office records and invites us to consider the enormous, devastating, almost religious power that the atomic bomb has and the havoc that it is capable of wreaking on our civilizations. How can a movie become this successful without bringing to the forefront of our consciousnesses the fact that we still have nuclear weapons, we still have this capacity, and we're in the middle of a war right now with a country that has nuclear weapons. Just because something hasn't happened yet, that doesn't mean it can't ever happen. Are we learning the lessons we should learn from this brilliant cultural artifact? Have you seen it yet? Did you enjoy it? Or do you prefer Barbie? Let me know in the comments below. Turn on the notification bell and subscribe right now. Let's have a little look at Oppenheimer before diving into the important questions. Why are we still obsessed with, infatuated with, and spending all of your taxpayer dollars on advancing nuclear weapons when we already have enough to destroy the planet thousands of times over? Is there a profit in this for people somewhere?
And I know what it means if the Nazis have a bomb.
Yeah, the Nazis, if they'd had one, they would have done it, wouldn't they? I mean, they were bastards.
All America's industrial might and scientific innovation connected here.
This is exciting, really, I suppose, because it is inspiring to see how ingenuity can come together, collaborate, conspire in the face of an enormous and potentially apocalyptic threat. However, what we are glorying in are weapons of mass destruction, inconceivable power in the hands of, well, who exactly? And benefiting, well, who exactly? And have we learned the lessons that this film is inviting us to contemplate? Indeed, Oppenheimer's most famous saying is, surely I am destroyer of worlds. Can't remember it exactly, I don't go to ridiculous degrees. But what he obviously contemplated is that now, for the first time, human beings have the kind of power that is usually reserved for the imagination, for the gods, for nature. However you regard that power, it is ultra-human. And now it is power that's in the hands of the US government, the Chinese government, the French, the British, and perhaps significantly, the Russian government.
Build a town, build it fast. If we don't let scientists bring their families, we'll never get the best.
Let's have a look at our addiction to nuclear weapons and the danger that they still pose. Nolan's film is a distinctive pop cultural phenomenon because it deals with the American use of nuclear weapons, a genuine rarity since ABC's 1983 airing of The Day After about the consequences of nuclear war. An earlier exception was Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, his satirical portrayal of the insanity of the Cold War nuclear arms race. I suppose the atomic bomb is an iconic item because for the first time we can conceivably destroy ourselves, destroy our planet. Plainly, the appetite for self-annihilation is within our species. I remember the first time I saw The Day After, that's when I was introduced to another level of reality. I remember watching that as a little boy and going, that's not real, is it? And my uncle helpfully going, yes. Yes, it is real. And Dr. Strangelove remains a great satire because it makes us consider the ridiculousness of our own power when we live with the fallibility that we all know we have. At a time when there is no trust in government, no trust in the judiciary, electoral process, military, Pentagon, deep state, the fact that we still have this power, even though up until this film it somewhat slipped off the agenda, is really astonishing and frightening, particularly as, and we almost can't hold this in our heads anymore with our micro attention spans, we are in a type of war with a nuclear power, with a leader who says he will use nuclear weapons if his edicts are not followed.
Why? How about because this is the most important thing to ever happen in the history of the world?
The film is based on American Prometheus, the Pulitzer Prize-winning 2005 biography of Oppenheimer by Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin. Nolan made it in part to break through the shield of antiseptic rhetoric, bloodless philosophizing, and public complacency that has allowed such world-ending weaponry to persist so long after Trinity, the first nuclear bomb test, was conducted in the New Mexico desert 78 years ago this month. A 2022 report by Ira Hefland and International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War estimated that a limited nuclear war between India and Pakistan that used roughly 3% of the world's 12,000 plus nuclear warheads would kill hundreds of millions, perhaps even billions of us. A full-scale nuclear war between the United States and Russia, the study suggests, could kill up to 5 billion people within 2 years, essentially ending life as we know it on this planet in a nuclear winter. So even a regional conflict, I suppose regional depending on where you live, if you're in India or Pakistan, then it's the same thing, could annihilate hundreds of millions of lives. But a superpower with access to reams of nuclear weaponry, one that we're kind of approaching in some ways, let me know in the comments if you think that's what's happening, could bring about an end to life on Earth as we know it. Now think about how much time is devoted to the discussion around climate change and the kind of measures that ought be undertaken in order to not exacerbate anthropogenic climate change, compared to the amount of conversation around should we be in this war with Russia if they've got nuclear weapons, even if you buy, and frankly not many of us do, the fact that it's a humanitarian endeavour to support Ukraine, who should be supported, but perhaps not at the cost of life itself.
Are we saying there's a chance that when we push that button, we destroy the world?
Obviously, all too many of us don't grasp the stakes involved in a nuclear conflict, thanks in part to psychic numbing, a concept regularly invoked by Robert J. Lifton, author of Hiroshima in America, A History of Denial, co-authored by Greg Mitchell, among many other books. Lifton describes psychic numbing as a diminished capacity or inclination to feel prompted by the completely unprecedented dimension of this revolution in technological destructiveness. We can't conceive of it, we can't conceptualize it, we can't imagine that Earth could be annihilated, that we could encounter biblical levels of destruction. So when we're postulating and speculating on Ukraine's war with Russia and America's funding of it, you know, of course, already that America has spent more on this war than Russia. Just bear that in mind, given that America are not supposed to be involved. Perhaps the reason that this ongoing record expenditure does not face the sufficient opposition, the opposition that it warrants, is because we simply cannot conceptualize what we're dealing with. Because there's never been, as far as we know, an annihilation of our entire species, we presume that could never happen. But there have been the New Mexico tests, there has been Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there is Putin in office saying, if you try and take back Crimea, we will use nuclear. Like, these things are becoming, I would say, dangerously close to annihilation. And it's only the fact that we can't conceptualize the prospect that stops us from going, should we stop doing this? Isn't it better for Ukraine? Isn't it better for Russia? Isn't it better for all of us to end this now? Isn't this an idea and practice that belongs to at least a century ago? Aren't we at a point now where we should just demand diplomacy of our representatives? You are funding that war, so you should be involved in whether or not that war happens. It should at least be voted for by the public. In a sense, it highlights the ineptitude of our systems as well as the ineptitude of our imagination. So perhaps this film Oppenheimer is doing us a great service by reminding us that nuclear war is a real possibility.
Chances are near zero.
Near zero.
What do you want from theory alone?
Zero would be nice.
Given the Nolan film's focus on Oppenheimer's story, some crucial issues related to the world's nuclear dilemma are either dealt with only briefly or omitted altogether. The staggering devastation caused by the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is suggested only indirectly, without any striking visual evidence of the devastating human consequences of the use of those two weapons. Also largely ignored are the critical voices who then argued that there was no need to drop a bomb, no less two of them, on a Japan most of whose cities had already been devastated by US firebombing to end the war. General and later President Dwight D. Eisenhower wrote that when he was told by Secretary of War Henry Stimson of the plan to drop atomic bombs on populated areas in Japan, I voiced to him my grave misgivings, first on the basis of my belief that Japan was already defeated and that dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary. I suppose that's a reminder that in relatively recent history, astonishing atrocities have been committed by the goodies. Our cultural memory and retelling of World War II is we were opposing the Nazis. Even this film makes much of that we have in Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, the genocidal, Holocaust-evoking Nazis, an enemy that legitimizes almost any response. But of course, it wasn't Germany that was the recipient of a nuclear destruction, and thank God. It was Japan, which is equally appalling, given that I think most of us at this point recognise it was not a strategic necessity, more of a kind of irresistible urge, almost a curiosity or a demonstration of potency that led to that. And we're not so different from the people that did that. We don't have a different mentality. And when you consider the conflict between Ukraine and Russia now, do you imagine that comparable minds might be at work? Well, what if we did have to? Well, what's the hit? If you watch Dr. Strangelove, another film on this subject, you see people chewing gum and calculating whether or not they can absorb the loss of 100 million, 200 million tops, and it just still be a sustainable civilization. These conversations doubtlessly take place while considering what Raytheon's third quarter might look like. The film also fails to address the health impacts of the research, testing and production of such weaponry, which to this day is still causing disease and death, even without another nuclear weapon ever being used in war. Victims of nuclear weapons development include people who were impacted by the fallout from US nuclear testing in the western United States and the Marshall Islands in the western Pacific, uranium miners on the Navajo lands, and many others. Speaking of the first nuclear tests in Los Alamos, New Mexico, Tina Cordova of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium, which represent the state's residents who have suffered widespread cancers and high rates of infant mortality caused by radiation from that explosion, said, "It's an inconvenient truth. People just don't want to reflect on the fact that American citizens were bombed at Trinity." So while telling a story that rightly celebrates the ingenuity of some of the scientists and strategists that were involved in that endeavour, we of course have to recognise that people suffer to this day as a result of that. And who among us believes that any of the conflicts that are happening in the world now deserve to be treated in the almost sacrosanct way that World War II was? This was a truly noble war against plainly evil opponents. Do we not think that there's some complexity around NATO's behaviour, the coup in 2014 when it comes to this war between Russia and Ukraine? That's of course not suggesting that Ukrainian people's suffering shouldn't be ended as soon as possible. It's just acknowledging that we're engaged in a game now that could lead to total annihilation. And we no longer live on a planet where you can comfortably and easily say, we're the goodies, we're doing what's right. This is just, even though that is exactly the kind of rhetoric that launched this campaign. Another crucially important issue has received almost no attention. Neither the film nor the discussion sparked by it has explored one of the most important reasons for the continued existence of nuclear weapons: the profits it yields the participants in America's massive nuclear industrial complex. I wonder if this film has been supported by deep state agencies and the Pentagon in the way that we know that even films as innocuous as Top Gun has been. It's impossible to make Hollywood movies without the cooperation of agencies like the Pentagon and without the American military. So whilst this film no doubt poses some pretty important questions, it also sort of glamorizes and normalizes nuclear weaponry, which perhaps we should be considering as a potential existential threat to all our kind rather than an opportunity to profit for military-industrial complex elites. Once Oppenheimer and other concerned scientists and policymakers failed to convince the Truman administration to simply close Los Alamos and place nuclear weapons and the materials needed to develop them under international control, the only way, as they saw it, to head off a nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union, the drive to expand the nuclear weapons complex was on. So Oppenheimer was to a degree an idealist who saw where this would likely lead and believed that it was a one-off necessity in order to thwart Nazism. But of course this was understood to be an opportunity for profit, as so many things are. Even the identification of UFOs is translated into, oh, we could make money out of this kind of thing. Many of you will be familiar with Project Paperclip and the likelihood that people that were involved in the Nazi regime, in Nazi science programs, were in fact brought to the United States of America to conduct the work that was subsequent to this work. Research and production of nuclear warheads and nuclear-armed bombers, missiles and submarines quickly became a big business whose beneficiaries have worked doggedly to limit any efforts at the reduction or elimination of nuclear arms. The Manhattan Project Oppenheimer directed was one of the largest public works efforts ever undertaken in American history. Though the Oppenheimer film focuses on Los Alamos, it quickly came to include far-flung facilities across the United States. At its peak, the project would employ 130,000 workers, as many as in the entire US auto industry at the time. That's an incredible endeavour. It was essentially part of the American economy from that moment on. Maybe then this event was not only seismic ideologically and militarily, but also economically. Maybe from this moment, it became a requirement that the military-industrial complex had to sustain itself through whatever means necessary. According to nuclear expert Stephen Schwartz, author of Atomic Audit, the seminal work on the financing of US nuclear weapons programs, through the end of 1945, the Manhattan Project cost nearly $30 $38 billion in today's dollars, while helping spawn an enterprise that has since cost taxpayers an almost unimaginable $12 trillion for nuclear weapons and related programs. And the costs never end. The Nobel Prize-winning international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, ICAN, reports that the US spent $43.7 billion on nuclear weapons last year alone. And a new Congressional Budget Office report suggests that another $756 billion will go into those deadly armaments in the next decade. In order to continue that level of funding, you require a compliant population, baffled and unable to consider what they are participating in or even ask if this remains necessary. It's not too late to reawaken Oppenheimer's idea that when it comes to global matters, we are all involved. When it comes to a program like nuclear armament, oughtn't this be conducted at an international level? Even if we're just talking about treaties here, a mutual agreement to stop this ridiculous expenditure when many people can't afford to heat their homes or eat. The fact that these kind of sums are being spent, which broadly speaking in a best case scenario could only be mutually assured destruction, doesn't seem like a good use of resources.
This is a matter of life and death. But I can perform this miracle.
Private contractors now run the nuclear warhead complex and build nuclear delivery vehicles. They range from Raytheon, General Dynamics, and Lockheed Martin, of course, usual suspects, to lesser-known firms like BWX Technologies and Jacobs Engineering, all of which split billions of dollars in contracts from the Pentagon for the production of nuclear delivery vehicles and the Department of Energy for nuclear warheads. To keep the gravy train running, ideally in perpetuity, those contractors also spend millions lobbying decision makers. Even universities have gotten into the act. Both the University of California and Texas A&M are part of the consortium that runs the Los Alamos Nuclear Weapons Laboratory. So to this day, these ideas have to be sustained through lobbying and expenditure. It's become an economic necessity. This is how it pertains to the current conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Is this conflict being supported and sustained for humanitarian reasons or economic reasons? Because built into the American economy is the necessity for ongoing war. It's been in the blueprint since the Manhattan Project.
That's happening, isn't it?
The American warhead complex is a vast enterprise with major facilities in California, Missouri, Nevada, New Mexico, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas. And nuclear-armed submarines, bombers, and missiles are produced or based in California, Connecticut, Georgia, Louisiana, North Dakota, Montana, Virginia, Washington State, and Wyoming. Add in nuclear subcontractors, and most states host at least some nuclear weapons-related activities. The business of America is war, and a big part of that business is nuclear weapons. Now, I suppose, God, some of you think, well, that shows that it's creating jobs, but it's creating a lot more than jobs, and there is more than one way to create a society that generates gainful employment, and I would suggest we start examining alternatives to one that seems targeted on eventual mutual destruction.
Until somebody builds a bigger one.
And such beneficiaries of the nuclear weapons industry are far from silent when it comes to debating the future of nuclear spending and policy making. Count on one thing. By itself, a movie focused on the origin of nuclear weapons, no matter how powerful, won't force a new reckoning with the costs and consequences of America's continued addiction to them. In truth, the situation couldn't be simpler. We need to abolish nuclear weapons before they abolish us. Hopefully, Oppenheimer will help prepare the ground for progress in that all too essential undertaking, beginning with a frank discussion of what's now at stake.
You are the man who gave them the power to destroy themselves. And the world is not prepared.
So considering this cinematic masterpiece and the incredible box office success of Oppenheimer takes us to some interesting places and to the very periphery of what we're able to conceive. It reminds us that what happened in Nagasaki and Hiroshima at the end of the Second World War could happen again. It reminds us that we should regard current geopolitical conflicts as potentially leading to those kind of outcomes. It reminds us once more that the reason that America doesn't have conversations about nuclear weapons and the military-industrial complex is because America sustains itself through these endeavours. So while it presents to us conflicts as humanitarian, it never draws our attention to the fact that it needs these conflicts to sustain itself and avoids at all costs conversation about the nature of what we're truly dealing with. Nothing less than the annihilation of our entire planet. So please, go and see Oppenheimer. But remember, it's not a movie, it's your reality. And remember that there are conflicts happening right now that could lead to explosions of that nature, not in the far-flung island of Japan, but in the cities where Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, etc. are currently profiting from this ongoing enterprise that ultimately benefits no one but them. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these. Remember, turn on the notification bell and subscribe. But more important than any of that, if you can, please stay free.